Now you hear it.
When you're a child, you learn there are 3 dimensions: height, width, and depth, like a shoebox. Then later you hear there's a 4th dimension: time.
From Seattle, we're Drinking the Movies. I'm Taylor Baker.
And I'm Michael Clausen.
All right, Michael. This is the first remote episode I believe we've ever done.
That's correct. Things are going to get crazy. We'll see how this goes.
It was a little bit convenient planning on our part. You know, you were doing it for a totally different reason than the fact that the sky is on fire. But that's as good a reason as COVID to not leave the house.
It is pretty surreal to not only be doing a virtual recording, which is highly unusual for us, but on a day where it looks like a nuke just went off outside. It's a weird day.
We don't quite have the Blade Runner aesthetic up here. It's more of a boy and his dog aesthetic, post-apocalyptic desert in Arizona type feel, but yeah, it's pretty nasty. Rescreening episode. We're doing Angelina Jolie Pitt and her film By the Sea. Shortly after the film was made, she obviously went back to Angelina Jolie and dropped the moniker in a divorce. But what was your initial impression of this title that I rather forced upon you?
I think this movie got a bad rap. I like this movie. I think I have some problems with it, but I am positive on it. I like it. How did it hold up for you on the second go-round? Or maybe third or fourth go-round?
Yeah, so I'd only watched it once, and then I watched it twice this time. And I did some homework with Angelina Jolie as well. This one was more of a learning about her and her background, and then just watching a performance that I've heard a lot about, which was her performance in Changeling, Clint Eastwood's historical film based on the chicken coop murder case. And I really love this movie. And like you, I see problems with it. It's a movie that I want to give a 5, and I mean that as in I sit down to watch it and I go, I'm going to give this a 5. And then it convinces me that I can't while I love it. So it's definitely a unique film in that way. I very rarely, I think, have felt that specific emotion of I'm going to give you 5 and then it talks me out of it and I still love it. Normally when you're talked out of that, you kind of get negative. But this is just like arms wide open. I love the attempt. I love the swing. It's a special one. Before we go down the rabbit hole too far, do you want to do our first impression of our next rescreening title, which will be Kenneth Lonergan's Margaret, and then get back to it?
What happened to you?
Nothing.
Do you want to tell us about it?
I think I can handle this part myself.
According to the statement, the light was green when the bus passed through the intersection?
Yes.
So you're saying she walked against the light?
I know you feel a sense of responsibility about what happened, but you can't not do your homework and you can't throw away your scholarship because of it. The bus driver probably has a family to support.
Do you remember me from the bus accident?
It's a tragedy. You cannot bring her back.
I'm talking about telling the accident investigators what really happened.
But you already talked to them.
I know that, but I lied.
So you're gonna go home, you're gonna do your homework, and I'm gonna lose my job. And who's gonna take care of my family? You?
I just need to talk to somebody who doesn't completely misunderstand who I am or what's going on inside me.
I feel like you and I used to relate to each other really well.
I feel so bad about what happened, and I'm trying so hard to do something about it.
The worlds of one would leave me alive, and yet you will weep and know why. It is Margaret you mourn for.
All right, we just watched the trailer for Kenneth Lonergan's Margaret, which will be the film we discuss in our next rescreening episode. This is one I've seen before. I understand this is one you have not seen. Is that correct?
Correct.
What are your thoughts?
I don't know. I'm super intrigued. I love Matt Damon. I love Mark Ruffalo and his previous work with Kenneth Lonergan that I have seen. I've pretty divisive on Anna Paquin, and seeing this, I I'm very intrigued to see what she does, because I understand that the original cut of the film was terrible and that it was re-released in 2011, which is the trailer that we watched the cut for, at least, or maybe it was finally released at that point. I don't exactly know the full background story with that, and so just wondering. I find myself wondering what would have happened if this film that is considered one of the best of the 2010s came out in her actual career trajectory, how that could have affected things. It certainly didn't get in the way of Mark Ruffalo, didn't get in the way of Matt Damon. I believe Allison Janney is the victim of the bus crash here. It didn't certainly get in the way of her, but I do question what a budding star like her might have gone on to do if she had that type of a critical work released.
Yeah, it is an interesting one to see pop up on so many best of the 2010s list after I feel like the release was kind of botched between the two different editions that came out. I'm assuming we'll both try and watch the director's cut for our rescreening
That's
episode.
the only one I'm going to watch. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember which one I watched. It had to have been the theatrical cut way back in the day. I vividly remember just watching it like in bed on a Saturday morning in college, I think, just a random selection of a movie. And I remember so clearly the accident itself that kind of puts the plot into motion, really shaking me up. But I honestly don't remember too much else about it. I just remember it really hit me. So it'll be fun to dig back into.
Yeah. Anything that's this meaty of a Kenneth Lonergan screenplay, I'm excited to see how that turns out. So, good selection by you.
Today's podcast is presented by Podgo. Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast, providing podcasters with a flat rate for ad space so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from Podgo. We recently joined as members, and you can too. Apply today to become a member and immediately be connected with advertisers that fit your audience. That's podgo.co at podgo.co.
And now back to By the Sea.
Written and directed by Angelina Jolie, who also stars along with Brad Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
What made you pick this title? Maybe we'll start there.
Well, I think we went over it in the previous rescreening episode, which essentially boils down to I have a certain affinity or love for this film that I felt like I experienced kind of in isolation because of the critical reception. I clearly remember seeing maybe it was Jimmy Fallon or something, one of those late night shows, and they go interview people outside of a theater in Oakland, I believe. And it's playing a Marvel movie or DC, the big blockbusters. And then they're also playing By the Sea that summer or, winter. And everybody that was asked what they were going to see essentially was going to see the blockbuster. And then he asked one woman who was on her way out of the theater that he thought was going in, what she was going to see, and she says, I actually just came out of By the Sea and I loved it. And it's so interesting to have an experience with a film where you can remember the only other person you remember liking it in such a fond way. So that doesn't really answer your question at all. It's just a fun anecdote. But I love this movie. It has everything that I love about La Ventura with everything I love about like the modern Hollywood glitz glam and self-reflection and wrestling with demons and all that complex stuff, which we'll get into the further we go on. Do you want me to just read the synopsis from the back of the Blu-ray so that people know what the heck is going on?
Absolutely. Let's start there.
So, as you mentioned, written, directed, and produced by Academy Award winner Angelina Jolie Pitt. By the Sea follows an American writer named Roland and his wife Vanessa, who arrive in a tranquil and picturesque seaside resort in 1970s France. Their marriage in apparent crisis. As they spend time with fellow travelers, including young newlyweds and village locals, the couple begins to come to terms with unresolved issues in their own lives. I do think that synopsis sums up the meat of what we're witnessing in the film pretty well, although it doesn't get into the grand illusions and delusions and all the real world complexity the film is rife with. This couple's last name is Bertrand. His first name. Yeah, his first name's Roland. Their last name is Bertrand. Angelina Jolie's mother's name is Marshallyn Bertrand. I believe 1 year previous to the date of filming here, Angelina Jolie underwent a double mastectomy to get rid of the possibility of breast cancer in her genetic line, which is what killed her mother. She has said that this film is kind of her writing and addressing things about her mother, but also about her marriage. I don't know if you know this, Michael, but this film was shot right after they got married on their honeymoon.
No, I did not know that. Okay, that's interesting. Extra textual detail. Okay.
August 2014, they were married on the 23rd of 2014, and I understand that's when they began shooting was, in that range of dates right after.
Got it. Probably one of, if not the most famous couples in the world at the time. Certainly it's some of the most looked at and sort of ogled at celebrities in the world at the time, and arguably still today even.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, it does feel like the bookend. They only made 2 pictures together. My understanding is that they met on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and then they were on a honeymoon shooting this film, which she wrote for them. And it, in many ways, she has now come to admit, kind of foreshadowed how the relationship was going and the inevitable breakup, which I just, the extra contextual stuff mixed with the Hollywood big acting fluff that's in the film itself and all the, double meanings of knowing that she's directing a scene and her looking into the camera before she pulls the plug out of the pipe and the camera zooms into so you're seeing things with her and how she's seeing them. She's reflecting on her body. There's numerous scenes where she goes out on the patio and she looks down on topless sundressers with a certain type of envy, and then she reclines, constantly looking cat-like as Jolie does on the sofa there, and lets herself be talked to by her neighbors, but there's that insecurity there that is personal. It's just such an interesting film, man.
Yeah, I think all the extra textual stuff suggests that it is a deeply personal project. I do tend to think that there is something about it that doesn't feel tremendously personal in how it comes to life on screen. I think that has a lot to do with performances, and especially how Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie engage with each other. I think there's something really interesting about how they both kind of carry themselves independently. I think where this falters for me is in how they engage with each other and the depth of feeling I think it really unearths between them. And I actually think I have a little bit more trouble with Angelina Jolie's performance than Brad Pitt's. I really like the reference points you already mentioned. You mentioned Antonioni. I actually thought a lot about Rossellini's journey to Italy, which is about an American couple going to Italy in that case. But there are shots in that movie of this couple out on the balcony of the hotel or house where they're staying and just, laying around in chairs, like so many of the shots we get in this movie, which are really shots that I love. I think the reference points, are super cool, that like you just don't see many big Hollywood stars trying to make something that's kind of paying homage to like 70s art house romance. Like, that's great. I love that stuff. I do sense that there is some just awkwardness to the performances and the chemistry between Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, and that holds me back from really loving it. But I still find myself much more positive on it than I expected it to be, given the reception we know it got.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you liked it. Did you think about Erland Josephson and Liv Ullmann at all while watching this?
You mean you're talking about Bergman?
Yeah, and I mean, most distinctly, obviously, like, this feels to me like a scene from a marriage. Not as good, obviously, but like so directly inspired, or like you just put these two cookies next to each other and they taste the same.
Oh, that's interesting. Bergman, yeah, that actually had not come to my mind, but yeah, that's a totally fair comparison.
I also thought of Cassavetes and Gina Rowland, right? That was also that 1970s art house theater where, beautiful movie stars together. You mentioned that you like the look of the film. Did you notice that the director of photography was Christian Berger, who is the frequent cinematographer for one Michael Haneke?
Oh, no, I did not know that.
Yeah, so that I think is definitely part of the reason why those landscapes in the background of these dialogues or the silent looks are just so beautiful. And I mean, how about the timing on the first time Brad Pitt flips over her sunglasses? Or I guess it's the second time after he returns. Just the timing of that lens dialing into focus. It goes from out of focus onto his shirt and then into focus on like a totally different object that isn't even in the center of the lens. Like, it's just such a cool shot. I nerded out on the cinematography a lot while watching it. Like, it was just gorgeous.
Yeah, you mentioned what I think is one of my favorite, almost throwaway details of the movie, which is the sunglasses, and Angelina Jolie's always putting them down face down and Brad Pitt subsequently turning them right side up, which I think is one of the more subtle kind of encapsulations of the state of the marriage. She's a little bit defeated about it. She no longer cares if it gets scratched. He's still trying. He's still flipping it over. It happens 2 or 3 times. It's conspicuous, but I think that's one of the more subtle metaphors, if you will, versus something like The Fisherman, which is more obviously a metaphor, not necessarily a bad one, but I appreciate the kind of tossed off nature of the sunglasses.
I have a feeling you watched this movie only once.
I watched it twice, actually.
Oh, really? And you still think oh man, when I was watching it for the second time, I was like, I love the sunglasses scenes, but they were just so not subtle. Like the first time, the second time, or the first 2 events of Brad Pitt doing it are subtle. But once you get to that third act of the film and it's still happening, like, it's the most unsubtle piece of physical writing that I think that she did. You're right, like, the discussions about the fishermen and her observing them are even more on the head. But I think that the way that the lens shows it doesn't make it wholly that. I do think that there is an ominous tension to the rocks. Now, that might just be my film history and what I see or think of when I see those rocks. But I do think that, like, there's a little bit more going on during the fisherman scenes versus those sunglass scenes where, like, you just know exactly what the entire purpose of that shot was.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, to maybe rephrase, I don't know that I would describe anything in this movie as particularly subtle, but for me, that is maybe relatively more subtle, only because people will come out of this movie and say, what do you think The Fisherman was all about? I don't know that people would necessarily hone in on the sunglasses thing, but you're right. To attentive viewers, the camera is directing her eye towards the sunglasses, no doubt.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I guess just a little bit more personal history on the Jolie side. So this film came out in November of 2015, and they had gotten married in 2014 in August, right? Well, before the movie ever even released to the public, Angelina Jolie had undergone a hysterectomy that she'd been planning on having. So I do think that this film, not just the double mastectomy, but knowing that she's going to have a hysterectomy, this is not only her grappling with her mom, with how the public sees her, this is her grappling with how she sees herself. And that, once again, is extra textual, but I think in a film written, directed, produced, starring an artist going through something like that, like it is as much a piece of the meat of what is happening within the narrative of the film as anything that's actually within the film. And seeing her look at Melanie Laurent with such lust and envy is, I think, just informed even more by the richness of the extra textual pieces here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear what experiences and the what experiences are informing this story. I just don't know how clearly or how truthfully some of that emotion is really getting translated to the screen for me. It has to do, I guess, with some affectation in the performances. There's something that just feels a little stilted about it. I wish that this felt a little bit more like the soul bearing that I think the extra textual details suggest that it is. I don't know that the direction is particularly sharp. I enjoy watching these two characters inhabit each of these spaces on their own terms and how they're each kind of dealing with this grief in two very different ways because they're approaching it from two completely different positions. I don't know how great of a director Angelina Jolie is here in directing herself alongside Brad Pitt. I wish there was something just a little more organic or deep about how they're interacting with each other. It does leave me feeling like it's a little shallow.
Do you have a comparison you would make for like how you think that interaction should have felt? Because I mean, there's certain portions, especially in the final third of the film, where I think a lot of stuff starts to fall flat. But the melancholia, the unique depression that, having a child die multiple times would give a woman, like, I don't know that I felt in the first 2/3 like anything that didn't feel natural about the reclusive depression and aloofness and hurt that might be. I don't know that I'm right. I didn't feel like it was wrong when I was watching it.
Yeah, I don't think I have a point of comparison where I think something else did this necessarily better, but I do think there are kind of two sides to the acting here. There's kind of the body language that they both kind of communicate through, and then the line delivery itself and some of the dialogue. What I do really like is a lot of the body language and how they both just kind of inhabit this space and how they both seem to carry grief in a very different way. She feels like she is just brittle and moves so carefully around the apartment and lays down so carefully. It's like she might just break because she's just so what she's carrying is just so heavy. And in him, you see him carrying exhaustion with her still being upset about what happened. And it's totally understandable. I think it's in dialogue like the lines where they're talking about resisting happiness that just feels written to me. I'm just not sure how convincing some of that dialogue is to me. There's some of the voiceover narration we get when Jolie is wandering along the rocks by herself that just doesn't really work for me.
I think I agree with you there. The most, I think, coherent way to put this is they are wonderful performances that are written excellent, and then they open their mouths.
That's fair. Yeah.
Because I'm just so utterly convinced by, not like you mentioned, like she does feel brittle, but she's so thin that that only, heightens that feeling. Another actress, like say Scarlett Johansson, doing the same things with her figure, I just wouldn't feel the same. But Jolie is so thin, you can see her bones and her veins in a way that you can't on different actresses. So she's using the way she looks to accentuate the physical behavior of the character. And once she gets to the points in time where her mouth is opened in talking to Brad Pitt, I think there's a lot of weakness there. But when she's talking to Melanie Laurent, I do find those exchanges interesting. When she goes to get the espresso, right, that kind of her first by herself experience, it's fine when she opens her mouth, but the real charm is the interaction she has that's silent with that little girl. It's just so wonderful. It just melts my heart every time I watch that scene.
Yeah, I do appreciate how, like, you could argue that there is kind of this suspense angle to the movie because it's not immediately revealed what it is that they are mourning. Ostensibly they're here so he could write his book, but clearly there's a secondary reason, really, which is maybe really the primary reason that they're here. I really do appreciate that scene because it gives us a pretty good idea of what they're here about. And I value that over having a carrot held out in front of me.
I completely agree.
Wondering, because this is about the relationship itself. This is not about the suspense, about the wondering. I appreciate the tip off.
Yeah, and I mean, building on that differently, were you? I mean, because you watched it for your first time, so when you didn't know what the end of the film was, did you wonder if she was going to kill herself? Did you wonder if there would be a death that occurs? Did that ever become something that you were, curious about and started diverging your attention?
I don't think I ever thought she might kill herself. I did think that there would be something involving the other couple. I thought Brad Pitt might kill the dude, to be honest. I thought that
he came close, and we never saw for certain that he didn't. We never saw proof of life.
Yes, that is where I thought something more might happen. I'm not sure I ever really thought she was going to take the leap for real. Do you remember your first experience, if you thought that was where this was heading?
Dude, my second experience, like, I knew what was going to happen, but once she gets down to those rocks, I go, am I sure she doesn't La Ventura it? I might be forgetting.
Yeah. The score is a little heavy for me throughout a lot of the movie. I think it's when she's going for those walks by herself on the rocks that I wish it didn't have the music at all. I think those scenes would maybe have even more power to them if that was just silent and you were just watching her listen to the waves, and there might be more ambiguity to it. I think the music is telling us that she's contemplating jumping. I think there's maybe some subtlety that the score strips from the movie.
Yeah, I think anecdotally, you're right. I will say the theme, which I'll call the theme, but I don't really know if this film actually has a dedicated theme, but that opening piece of score that you come in on the car with as you arrive in the village, I love that. I just love that sound so much. It sets the mood, it sets the tone, and it simultaneously kind of gives you this bigger than life aura, which is what it has. This is, for all intents and purposes, a piece of melodrama about two really, really famous people, and it kind of sets the stage for, we all know they're famous, but we're pretending that they're not who we think they are, just for right now. And I believe it plays the same score as they're exiting the village at the end in the same car. And I just think that kind of is a perfect bookend for how to hold this movie within yourself. if you want to hold this movie within yourself, which I gather not too many people do.
Yeah, I like the bookend of that song. I think that's just a nice bit of kind of place and period setting, that immediately just feels so like late 60s or early 70s. Um, there's also some piano that I thought was just absolutely beautiful, which is towards the end. I think if they're kind of getting ready to pack it up, I think it's what's also in the trailer as well, and I really like that. I think it's maybe some of the more orchestral stuff that I think suggests more feeling than it really needs to. But that's not a terribly unusual thing for Hollywood film of this kind. So not a particularly unusual critique.
Well, it's not unusual for Hollywood film. I will say that when you say Hollywood film of this kind, what else comes to mind for you?
I mean, I don't know that I have any other immediate points of comparison, but it feels distinctly Hollywoodish to me, right? In the way that
100%
movies do not. And I think it's very classical in its construction. I actually don't know that I described this as particularly modernist, like an Antonioni movie is. I think the themes are similar and the circumstances are similar. I think this feels like very like it's constructed in a classic Hollywood way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of classic Hollywood to the looks and the framing, and then there's some of the best of Antonioni with framing a character, giving a Hollywood look with a great background, right? But I think that the performances are so overwhelming that it undoubtedly becomes that Hollywood feel. But what I think I treasure about this film is I personally find it unlike any other Hollywood film in the last 20 years, with giant performances that are reminiscent of classic Hollywood, that are, not really steeped in any form of contemporary like popularism. Like there's just nothing about this film that is popular or of the moment. And it's simultaneously made of two of the most popular of the moment people wrestling with something deeply personal to at least the writer. And because it's now, released that it's about her feelings on the relationship, I just can't think of another more self-reflective film of this caliber. And I don't necessarily think that means that it should be great or not graded, like all other film. But there's just something so unique that if someone asks me, what's a movie that you would recommend that other people wouldn't, I think this is one of the few that would come to mind.
Yeah. I'll maybe throw out another example of the kind of thing that maybe didn't work super well for me, just to get your thoughts. There is the scene where Angelina Jolie is in the bathtub and Brad Pitt's gone to the hole in the wall and he's sort of describing to her what it is that he sees on the other side.
Yes.
I think there's just kind of an over seriousness about that exchange, about the description Brad Pitt gives, that it just feels a little overworked or affected in some way. I'm assuming you don't get that vibe.
Well, I think that was purposeful. I definitely get the vibe that you're describing. However, I take it more charitably, I think. It does not bother me that that's what he's doing, because the intent declared within the film by Brad Pitt is that this entire trip is supposed to fix his wife. And up to this point, this has been the only thing that led them to physical intimacy, discussion of physical intimacy, how they feel about people, how they feel about inhabiting their bodies. So I believe in the earnestness in his intent. I don't buy the delivery, but I see both sides there. It's just I feel a little bit more charitable, I think, about this scene in particular. I think as a whole, if you isolate those bathtub scenes or the shower scenes, however you want to describe the bathroom scenes that they share, they're the most melodramatic, and like I wouldn't say they're unnecessary, but they really undermine a lot of the things that the physical performance brings, I think.
Yeah. If anything, like I might have gone for less dialogue and more glances, more of just seeing them kind of doing what they're already doing, which is just kind of inhabiting these two different spaces, him in the bar, her at the hotel room, and how that just speaks to where their relationship is at. And I won't belabor the point, but it does fall down when I think the dialogue really gets going. And it's maybe when they get a little more worked up that I think I feel that a little bit too, when he gets pissed off for her having bought the younger guy a jacket. He kind of like
the same
rushes
jacket.
Toward her. Yeah, rushes toward her in the bathroom, kind of backs her into a corner in there, and she is sort of frightened by this assault. And I don't know, it doesn't ring particularly true to me in sort of the frightened stance she takes. But I'll let that go. There's other stuff to talk about.
Yeah, well, I would just redouble and say the bathroom scenes, while like dramatically necessary because of a writing perspective, I guess, they just undermine the physicality that the story that the physicality of the performance that Jolie gives has created. Because in those scenes, she has to talk, and as we mentioned, when she talks, the whole thing kind of begins to crumble. But I mean, that in and of itself, I find more charming and interesting than negative, I guess. This is just one of those movies where even its flaws, I just find fascinating curiosities, and I just want to let them be because it is so unique, and I can't point to something like it, and I'm glad it's here. But it's certainly not The Handmaiden, which we talked about previously. It's not a perfect film. It is not coming from a keen cinematic eye with perfect formula in its screenplay, but it's filled with heart and intention and honesty and reflection, and that for me goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do. I really am on board with the sentiments of the film, and just the idea of how they are at such completely different stages of grief. And I think, the scenes of Brad Pitt at the bar, just kind of being messily drunk with the great bartender. He's awesome. We'll talk about him, I'm sure. Just really get that sense across of how exhausted he is by how morose this relationship is. I think that really works. And again, the way she carries herself and the way she looks, it's partly like that eye makeup that just looks like she is just like,
so good.
It's like her eyes have just been bruised from so much crying at some point, and now there's just no energy left. It's this kind of lethargic energy she has as she just hardly even leaves the apartment or the hotel. I think all that works.
100%. I genuinely don't know exactly which character or what the name of that character is, but who I think is Michelle, but I believe it's Niels Aristrup, who you brought up, who is the bartender who says, I normally wouldn't ask why someone's getting drunk for breakfast, but for you I'll make an exception, to Brad Pitt. And he talks him into having more vodka or more gin with some buttered toast by through some clever wordsmithing. But that fabricated piece and the way that Angelina Jolie framed their characters as kind of a narrative device for reflection for Brad Pitt, I really think is what steeps the character in feeling more solid than Jolie does. Like if you had to, or if you were to ask me which character at the end of the day seems to be the realist. I would say it's Brad Pitt's character because of those interactions, whereas Angelina Jolie doesn't really have any interaction that doesn't feel like a waking dream or a nightmare. Like everything just feels non-existent or like a delusion or something that she thought she did. There's a certain unreliability to watching her character. I think that that's framed maybe by the fact she's the director and just has a natural flair of unreliable narrator to the very camera work that she composes. But with Brad, there's something brooding, there's something physical that you can focus on. And watching him get drunk with Michelle, I mean, I could watch a TV show. It's 10 hours long about that.
Yeah, there is something very real about the bartender that almost just kind of rubs off on Brad Pitt because of their time together. The weariness about his wife having passed away, his daughter that's in the States somewhere, that all just feels so true, and that I think that's entirely convincing. I think the supporting cast does a lot for the movie. I like the younger couple, and I like how between the three we're getting these three very different stages of marriage. I mean, I think that is like the theme of the movie for me, is kind of grief and marriage. And between the three, you get late stages of marriage, midlife marriage, and early marriage. I think that's a pretty cool setup. And the supporting characters really sell their parts of that equation.
And Michelle's relationship with the hotel owner, right? Like that, he's already the character that kind of grounds everything. And the fact that he has a grounding character just creates, this is a comparison that goes no further than this. A feeling that feels as real as when I watch certain women and I see characters interacting with Laura Dern or with Kristen Stewart that had interacted with the other one, and it just makes the world feel real. There's a special earthly composition that happened to Michelle's character because of those framing choices and how well casted they were.
Yeah. Do you think this is a particularly bleak vision of marriage, or not so much?
I don't know. I don't think this is about marriage. I think this is about grief, and marriage just happens to be the context in which the grief is occurring. As I mentioned, this is her kind of feelings about her mom, and I personally felt that while watching. This doesn't feel like it's just about her trying to process things with Brad Pitt contextually. This feels like someone trying to figure something out about feelings of depression and grief. And the framing of a relationship, while very important for the way that the story plays out, I don't find that important to the nature of the character. Like that's unfortunately how this character is defined, is by the marriage. But I don't really think of this character in definition of marriage. I think of her in definition of grief. And I think that's the point, and the envy of life.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I guess for me, I just kind of viewed them as going hand in hand in the context of this story. Yeah, I don't know that I can think of too many other movies that really tap into the kind of shame or sense of the kind of the self-destructiveness that follows from a woman either having lost a child or realizing that she just can't bear children, and the kind of shame that comes with that, and how hard that can be for a man with that woman to really comprehend, and just how deeply troubling it can be for a relationship, is I think something pretty worthwhile about the movie. Yeah.
I agree with you. what do you think about the thing that we've barely talked about, which is the framing device of the picture, which is the hole in the wall and the observation of this couple and their acts of intimacy, we'll say, because it's not just sex; it's also discussion and personal feelings and those talks that take up just as much as the sexual activities do.
Yeah, I think it's a cool device. I mean, I think the way it's the shots themselves are sort of effective in conveying how it's this kind of escapism for her, and him too, but especially her, in that it allows her to kind of delude herself into thinking that she can live vicariously through this younger couple again. I think that's pretty effective. What about you?
I definitely don't know the way to put together words about it, but I really, really, really like the way that the framing device is pulled off, because it adds a layer of self-reflection to the writer, because the performer is the director and the writer, and we anecdotally know what was happening in her personal life. You're seeing Angelina Jolie direct the film in which she's observing someone who hasn't had a double mastectomy, who isn't planning on having a hysterectomy, who can still have children, and wrestling with that. But she's not just doing that through her, she's also doing that through remembering her mother. And so having that framing device where you are going through a hole to look at a scene, which is what she's doing with the camera in the first place, to look at Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt sitting at a wall. It it might be meta or whatever and be annoying in some way to some people, but to me, it allows a way of reframing the entire conversation to have a little bit more earnestness, no matter how you land on the film. It just really brings home the point of self-reflection.
Yeah, it's different from if they had just encountered this couple at the hotel and had just, even if she had just followed the couple around the hotel or something like that, the story.
Or observed them from the balcony by itself.
Yeah, exactly. The idea that she is just blocking out the rest of the world so that she can completely imagine herself, reimagine herself in these kind of glory days of marriage. Is pretty effective.
Yeah, it's not just the reimagine herself though, right? Because at the end, it turns into something different. It's she is questioning whether or not she is still something that would be desirable, and that ultimately is what leads to the what I would have to call an anticlimactic finale, but still one that I think we arrived at earnestly. I just don't care for that particular payoff. I would have rather see the film go in a different way, but I understand the intent to have her go into the other room and seduce Melanie Laurent's now husband while Brad Pitt watches. I just personally didn't care for it, but I get it.
Yeah, and it's partly about how she sees herself in the wake of this tragedy after realizing that she can't bear children, but equally a part of that is how she thinks other men are seeing her.
Exactly.
And we don't really get that until the end, and I think that's what kind of illuminates that theme, is that what is promising about that to her is that she doesn't know. I think she literally says that so much, is that how could he know me, or something like that, or
exactly. Yeah, it was built up slowly. It's just I don't know. Were you happy it went there, or would you rather have the sense of not knowing?
No, I think it needed to go there.
Okay.
She's sort of entering this world that she's only been looking at from a distance. I think that was a necessary kind of break from the delusion in a way, so that she knows it's not really going to work, and that's what forces the confrontation. I think it's necessary. What about you?
Well, I mean, no, I don't. that was the point, right? That I was making. That I don't think you I don't think that you always need an answer to something like that. I think that it was well introduced enough through the yachting scene, through the interactions she had on the patio. I think we knew that was there. Um, it, there's just this is a film where I didn't want as much closure. There's movies that are very cookie cutter and provide you with closure and answers and stuff, and I think that this provides way too much of that and is ultimately part of its detriment. Its failure is that it tries to give you answers for things that in the real world just wouldn't be answered.
So would you rather it not have had the climax at all, where she finally kind of confesses? It's not really a confession, but finally speaks out about being barren. You would not. You would rather not even have that.
Yeah, I don't think that. I personally don't think that was necessary. But everyone has a different experience with storytelling. It's just I already knew through, I guess, just watching a bunch of movies and reading a lot of books that was going to be the reason why she was going to be this macabre. There's no other reason. Her husband's alive. Her husband's with her. Parents aren't going to do that when they die. A cat or a dog isn't going to do that when they die. The only thing that's going to make a woman that closed off physically is going to be something that personal. And so I didn't need to be told what I already knew would be the reason for that behavior.
Yeah, that's fair. I can see that. Normally I'd be with you, where I'd always almost opt for the more ambiguous conclusion with less with fewer answers, I guess. In this case, I did kind of appreciate the specificity that comes with it, just because it seems like the devastation that a woman can feel and the damage to your self-worth that can come after that really specific kind of experience. I don't know. I think there's something beneficial to that confrontation that just helps bring that idea to life. But I can always understand the desire for ambiguity.
Yeah, normally we're in opposite sides of the boat, so even going against the grain here, we're disagreeing about the merits of the film and what's good and what's bad. It's if By the Sea is nothing else, it is divisive.
That is true. Yeah, no doubt.
It's also, I think, distinctive when I say By the Sea and how it physically looks. Is there anything else that you would really compare here in the last 10 years of, that movie kind of looks like this?
I would have to revisit it. What actually came to mind, even though the tone is so different, is Before Midnight.
Oh, interesting.
I think that's in Italy, but I remember that being on the coast, right? At least for part of it.
Yeah.
Some random images just popped in my head from that movie. What about you?
Yeah, I think about the film Youth. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's got really, really strict cinematography that's very beautiful landscapes, but very, pristine and clear cut, like movements of the camera, which I do get the sense of here, especially in the first half. I do think that the camera movements lose a little bit the further this gets on. And then there's another film that I'm forgetting the name of that had Tilda Swinton in it, where it was her and Tom Hiddleston, I believe, and it was not Only Lovers Left Alive, and they were like beside a pool. I think Dakota Johnson was in it.
Oh yeah, the Luca Guadagnino one.
Yeah, I think that there we go. I think that this does look a little bit more like a Luca film, depending on which Luca, not Suspiria, obviously.
Yeah. I could see that. Yeah. Similar kind of location and setting. Yeah, 100%.
Was there anything else you want to go over thematically or character-wise here?
See if I have anything back in my notes for a second. Anything that comes to mind while I am gathering my thoughts?
I do think that having the introduction of the side-by-side shot, I believe it's from the water where we see the car go through the boat launch and literally drive through the water, and we see that point, which is the boat launch, in which the ocean is touching the shore and going into the street, essentially. That creates a very distinctive sense of place that the kind of resonates throughout the film, and that's really the first time that it kind of tells you that this is its own place, that has these fingerprints that you're going to remember when someone brings up the title. There's just certain things about this film and how it looks that you can't take away from it.
Yeah, 100%. I think the location is huge in my affection for the movie. If you could put it anywhere else that was just less attractive, I might be less into it, but this is a very easy movie to just be in because of where it is.
Exactly. And Michelle, the bartender, is part of where it is, right? Like, he becomes the setting in a way.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, the costumes are very glamorous and shiny and awesome.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, they feel relevant, too. I kind of like how disheveled Brad Pitt always looks, and how Angelina Jolie looks like she is in mourning, especially with some of the black clothing. She's kind of hiding behind that hat and the sunglasses, obviously. She really does look like she just came from a funeral sometimes. I think if you somehow really thought that they were just here for him to write a book, the costumes alone could suggest to you that they are in mourning about something.
Yes, agreed. Was there anything else, or should we get on to our favorite scenes?
Let's get on to favorite scenes. What do you got?
Oh, you're gonna turn it back around to me. I thought I was gonna get you and then have some time to think. I already brought it up, so I will tell you what I already said, and then I will have a anecdote as well. And that is the scene where she goes grocery shopping and then asks for the espresso, the big one from the top shelf, and the exchanges she has that are silent with the young girl at the counter, and how the young girl looks at her and smiles, and there's just that sincere childish glimmer in her eye of excitement, and thinking that this lady's pretty and exciting, that only a child could have, and Angelina Jolie trying to hold herself back and not feel emotion but also process it. It's such a physical performance of such great beauty. And secondly, the many, 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 many times that the camera, just for a second, catches her reflection of staring daggers into Brad Pitt through the mirror.
I love it.
How about you?
One that comes to mind actually has less to do with the filmmaking than just the content of the scene itself, which is not what I usually go for with a favorite scene. But I do like when they go for a drive, which is, I think, the one time in the movie they actually leave the hotel and they stop by the church, and just the dialogue she has as she comes out and talks to Brad Pitt. I should have written down the lines, but it's something about praying for the strength to meet it when she apologizes for however she has treated him in the years that they've been grieving over this.
That was a good scene. That made me think of the scene that we just covered. We watched 3 films from a Middle Eastern filmmaker. One of them, she goes into a church and comes out and has that great line of dialogue where they're getting married. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Okay. You're talking about Certified Copy?
Yes, there we go. Certified Copy.
Yeah. I just like the kind of the hard truth about that sentiment, that she has this anger about the fact that they're both in grief, but she has to deal with this in a really different way and in a really severe personal way that he just can't fully understand. And she, that there's just anger in that. She's maybe even jealous in a way that he gets to grieve, but he doesn't have to grieve in the same kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
I like the sentiment there.
I do too. It's deeply personal. On that note, I think we should leave it, and we'll be back in a month rescreening Margaret from Kenneth Lonergan.
Until next time. And that's another one in the can. Virtual can.
Now you don't.